to get official, I'm Meg Carney, the founding director of the Solstice Master Fine Arts and Creative Writing program here at LaSalle University. Welcome to the sixth in a series of 7 readings taking place as part of our Winter 2024 residency. This is 10 days here on our campus in Auburndale, Massachusetts, which launches our spring 2024 semester. As we open this physical and virtual space, I would like to note that we acknowledge that the territory on which LaSalle University stands is that of the Pawtucket and Massachusetts people. LaSalle's campus is a place to honor and respect the history and continued efforts of the Native and Indigenous community leaders who make up Eastern Massachusetts and the surrounding region. This statement is one small step in acknowledging the history that brought us to reside on this land and to help us seek understanding of our place within that history. Ownership of land is itself a colonial concept. Many tribes had seasonal relationships with the land we currently inhabit. Today, Newton and Auburndale are still home to Indigenous peoples, including the Nipmuc Nation and the Massachusetts peoples. For more information, please visit the Massachusetts Center for Native American Awareness and the Commission on Indian Affairs and the state of Massachusetts. And now for tonight's reading, and just as an unconventional aside, before our residency began last week, I was having all these residency-related dreams. And in one of them, we were all on a spaceship. And I have likened the Solstice program to being on a spaceship at some commencement ceremony. So it kind of made sense. But we're all in a spaceship, and David Yu was driving. And he kept telling us all over the loudspeaker to strap in because he wanted to do some loop-de-loops. So, first up tonight, we will have fiction and YA fiction faculty member David Yu. So strap in, everybody. He will be introduced by Solstice YA fiction student Colleen Egan. And then we'll have poet and creative nonfiction writer José Araguz up next, and he will be introduced by creative nonfiction student Marissa Trunfio. So, Colleen, come on up.
Hey, y'all. So I have the honor of introducing David Yu, also known as Dave and D Smooth. David Yu is the author of novels Girls for Breakfast, named the NYPL Best Book for Teens and a Book Sense pick. And stop me if you've heard this one before, the Chicago Best of the Best selection, along with middle grade novel The Detention Club. His first collection of essays, The Choke Artist, was a finalist for the Massachusetts Book Award. He holds a BA from Skidmore College and an MA in creative writing from University of Colorado Boulder. He wrote a regular column in the Korean Journal and currently teaches at the Gotham Writers Workshop. Just to poll the room, who thinks of David when they hear the word triceratops? Hummingbird? Bodybuilding. If you were to ask anybody in this room their favorite moments about David's writing, they'd probably begin to mention their favorite lines, start laughing, and not be able to stop or finish their sentence. Humor just comes naturally to him. In an interview with Harim Shafi, he says that I tend to be sarcastic, verging on obnoxious when I feel most comfortable, and added, that's the stuff that makes me laugh is the humor that's just emotionally honest, coming from a source of pain, usually. David's humor perfectly complements his writing, such as in The Choke Artist, he addresses his fears and insecurities, but lets the reader connect with him through those comedic elements. He's quick-witted and always hits you where you least expect it, either in your heart or in your funny bone. He's also not just a literary wizard, but he can play the guitar, drums, he played tennis, soccer, and basketball in his ample free time. Somehow he has free time. David also doesn't just teach writing, but he moves across all genres. He's involved in creative nonfiction, fiction, and writing for young people. His impact here is monumental, and I've had the honor of working with David for 2 semesters. And if anyone else here has, they know one thing. His packet responses are literary masterpieces, some of which rival the length of assignments I'd be sending in. My first packet to David in the first semester, his response was 17 pages long. David just knows exactly what to write when you need. And I'd like to think I'm one of his favorites because he always let me email the packets instead of putting them in the mail. Something that's always stuck with me about David is his wisdom, which he generously decides to sandwich between movie and TV show recommendations. He's also a psychic because he talked about this quote I'm about to mention in class today after I had already written this. So in this first packet, our 17 pages, he shared some advice that a college professor once gave him. He's never forgotten and has shared with all of his students. The quote is, "All the hair pulling, all those hours and nights of being unable to write and hating yourself for it, that is writing. That's the real meat of the writing process. The typing is the easy part." And if that doesn't make you feel better about your writer's block, I don't know what will. So please welcome psychic writer extraordinaire, David Yu.
Thank you, Colleen, for that introduction. That list of things you gave of things I do, those are all things I haven't done in like 20 years. I don't do anything. And now I know you're the dream. I'm the last person who should drive the spaceship. I know. Every morning when I pull up to the library, I'm like, it's a miracle I made it here. It's just no breaks. Okay, so I'm going to read the first half of a really old essay about my introduction to temping. The main reason I chose to delay adulthood and further my lack of studies out in Boulder, Colorado, was because I'd spent the bulk of my life living in homogeneously white towns in the Northeast and was starting to think my environment was the main culprit of my self-loathing. After attending college in upstate New York, it was time to spread my wings culturally, so I decided to move out west. Shortly after relocating to the foothills of the Rockies, I realized I was pretty much the only Asian guy around. The only thing that had changed was the mountainous backdrop. For that matter, nobody seemed to actually be from Colorado. Every license plate was either from New England or California. This didn't deter me, however, and I embraced change, primarily by growing my hair out for the first time. I'd struck a deal with myself that I wouldn't cut my hair until I finished the program. By the time I shaved it, I was starting to look like Crystal Gale. My long-haired phase was something of an awakening for me while it lasted. I got really tan, and on top of that, I'd get really red-faced from drinking beers, since, as countless non-Asian friends have publicly explained to me over the years, Korean people lack the enzyme to break down alcohol the way normal people do. And one night at the catacombs, my preferred watering hole in the dark basement of the Hotel Boulderado, a drunk asked me if I was Native American. I vociferously nodded yes, thrilled with veritable proof that I'd perceptibly changed. "What tribe are you?" he asked, and I glared at him with centuries of disgust before muttering in a solemn voice, "Apache." Clearly, I still had lingering issues with my ethnicity at this point. For 2 years of grad school, I lived the life of a writer. I quit playing sports and didn't bother working out anymore, using the excuse of being an artiste, to stop obsessing about my gangly physique for a change. Instead, I padded around my cold apartment in worn slippers, talking out my stories while smoking cigarette after cigarette with the windows barely cracked. I was a star in workshops, a big fish in a tiny pond in a landlocked state. And by the end of the program, I was fully convinced I was going to be an author someday. After defending my thesis, I visited one of my professors a final time before heading back east. In retrospect, he was the last person I should have sought advice from. Despite having a mentor on the faculty that I revered, I kept coming back to him for advice instead, simply because he looked the part. He was a dead ringer for Hemingway, and that was all I needed to consider his word the law. I asked him, what kind of job should I look for in the real world that will allow me to preserve my mental energy to still write at night? As insipid as possible, he replied, without looking away from his newspaper, and my fate was sealed. Make sure to flick the light off when you leave. That way students won't be able to tell I'm in here. Okay, I said, realizing that he probably wasn't up for a goodbye hug. So instead, I warmly patted the brick wall next to the door as I left. I packed up my Accord and headed back east, moving back in with my parents and strategizing my next move. They pleaded with me every night at dinner, which was around the time I usually woke up, to find a respectable job, similar to the ones their Korean friends' sons were getting. All those model minority kids from the Korean church were now taking over Wall Street or starting residencies at hospitals on the Eastern Seaboard or working 60 hours a week at prestigious law firms in the city. My parents argued that if I wasn't going to become a respectable investment banker or doctor or lawyer, at the very least, I ought to get a steady job in insurance, given that Hartford was the insurance capital of the world. My parents hadn't deduced by this point that I always did the exact opposite of whatever they suggested, and so they were stunned when I chose instead to temp for a living in the Boston area while I quietly and earnestly worked on my great American novel about squirrels. Flash forward to the fall, and there I was, stuffing sample lipsticks into envelopes on an assembly line in a mostly barren Elizabeth Grady cosmetics warehouse, pocketing a handful when nobody was looking so I could have Christmas presents without shooting my grocery budget, burning $9 an hour and living in a tiny one-bedroom apartment rooted squarely between Tufts University and the North Street projects in Somerville. Although I'd half-heartedly had designs on moving to New York City, I opted in the end for the Boston area because I wanted to be able to afford to keep my car and, more importantly, felt like I wore far too much fleece to fit in fashion-wise in the city. The thing is, temping wasn't that bad at first. Initially, I kind of enjoyed the freshness of going to different companies each week. Sorting 8 bins of junk mail every day makes most people feel like Sisyphus, whereas I considered distributing mail a fun challenge that made me feel like a giddy extra in the Hudsucker proxy. I believe data entry was a true, downright noble test of endurance, effectively a desktop game, not dissimilar to playing Free Cell or Spider Solitaire. I was able to adequately preserve my mental energy at these temp gigs and still sit at my computer at night. To boot, temping furnished me with free access to company printers and photocopiers. The first few months of temping were, in retrospect, a golden time for me. Even the physical ailments brought on by data entry gave me a sickening satisfaction. Back pains and walking around with my arthritic hands cradled against my stomach like a velociraptor served as proof that I was, for once, working hard. I constantly remind myself that the crappy pay of temping protected me from becoming dependent on a decent salary at a full-time position, and more importantly, it kept me from feeling defined by my day job. Being bored with temp work was crucial to cultivating my passion for writing. I temped because I refused to risk gaining a social life at some full-time job. It starts out as an innocent beer after work on a Friday afternoon, and then before you know it, you've given up the writing dream and instead spend the bulk of your free time talking about your fantasy football picks with Jimbo from purchasing. I was fortunate to have found a cheap studio apartment in Teal Square that included free utilities, and I soon settled into a simple life where I temped by day and wrote at night, coupled with the occasional set of uninspired push-ups. I should clarify that affording this existence on meager temping paychecks was made possible only by ignoring that my student loans were accruing $3 in interest a day and by my lack of health insurance. But even these factors didn't deter me. I figured not having health insurance was forcing me to lead a healthier, safer life. And who needed a dentist when you could clean your own teeth with a pushpin? As for the interest accruing on my student loans, as well as my utter inability to chip away at them, I was ever the optimist and figured it was only a matter of time before I sold my aforementioned Great American Squirrel novel, which, according to my research, was a story that had never been tackled before. I figured the market was cluttered with all these generic literary debuts about the lazy gay summer after college, whereas mine would stand out from the pack simply due to the fact that it was about rodents. In a nutshell, it was a hyper-realistic, non-anthropomorphic, thereby dialogue-free, novel about a couple of years in the lives of 2 warring families of squirrels living just outside Harvard Square, an urban Grapes of Wrath meets Reservoir Dogs epic that I'd placidly typed several hundred pages of during those first few months after starting my new life. Things weren't exactly humming, but I was surviving. And with a grim sort of satisfaction, I realized I was indeed living exactly the life I'd set out to have. It seemed the perfect recipe for success. Faulkner wrote in a goddamn bathtub, after all. Sure, the self-imposed isolation was making me a little weird. Anytime I talked out loud, my voice sounded totally unfamiliar to me, and I interacted with people so infrequently that I could barely maintain eye contact with the weatherman on TV. But at least I was parked in front of the computer at 2 a.m. on weeknights, just like I'd envisioned back in Boulder. That was not just the most important gauge of whether my life was turning out according to plan, but the only gauge. On top of this, I met Amanda one weekend and we hit it off immediately. The beginning of our relationship was like one of those whirlwind romances you see in the movies that never starred someone like me. One moment we're shyly glancing at each other from across the room at a party. Then a month later, she moves in, and I realize I'm never going to be able to enjoy the luxury of taking a private dump with the bathroom door wide open for the rest of my life. As thrilled as I was to suddenly find myself in a serious relationship with a girl, it quickly dawned on me that living with your partner is incredibly stressful because sustaining it requires having to hide all the unattractive aspects of yourself in order to maintain the illusion that you're the person you purported to be during the honeymoon stage. The rationale is that by slowly doling out all the gross tics and quirks of your personality, you trick her into a long-term relationship. By the time she realizes that in reality you're kind of appalling, it's too late to back out. For instance, I had to hide the fact that I was, at the time, a chain smoker. Since Amanda was a straight arrow, goody-goody former captain of her college soccer team, I had no choice but to lie and give her the impression that I was merely a social smoker, which meant that I became hyper-vigilant about not constantly smelling like a motel room around her. Gone were my carefree days back in Boulder where I'd fall asleep with an ashtray on my bare chest and wake up with sooty eyelashes. Now I had to sneak smokes out on the back deck even when Amanda wasn't around. I stored an aerosol can of deodorizer out on the back porch to further disguise my habit. Human beings are made up of mostly oxygen, carbon, and hydrogen. A close fourth for me was Febreze. Before coming back inside, I'd spray myself liberally and stick a piece of gum in my mouth, then head straight for the bathroom where I'd scrub my hands with soap, brush my teeth, and gargle Listerine till I violently dry heaved in order to get the smoky smell off my tonsils. Growing up, I was one of those disgusting kids who never brushed their teeth, routinely showing up to sleepovers, sans toothbrush, and often going to bed without feeling the slightest compulsion to go to the bathroom for any reason. The concept of getting ready for bed held absolutely no meaning for me. You mean mentally? I once earnestly asked a friend's mother. On the plus side, I had cleaner teeth because of living with Amanda, and I rarely got colds because I washed my hands 50 times a day. But the stress of having to sit there champing at the bit to have a smoke and pretending I was instead nervous about the unrest in Korea or something, while feeling vaguely nauseous from the noxious fumes I'd sprayed onto my chest on the deck throughout the day, only made me chippy after a while, especially in the mornings when I'd wake up in the throes of a 7-hour bout of withdrawal. The notion that maybe I was an innately angry, hyper-aggressive person and that cigarettes had kept the real me at bay all these years weirded me out. But in hindsight, I know my anger issues weren't the result of withdrawal or guilt that I had to engage in subterfuge around the apartment. It was the temping. My perspective on temp work officially began souring about 3 months into my new life. Data entry and light clerical duties lost their luster in startlingly fast fashion, and I quickly grew to perceive it exactly the way everyone else does. That really sucks. But the menial labor I didn't mind as much as the way I was universally perceived by full-time employees. Temping is, to the uninitiated, a cold, dehumanizing vocation, and psychologically it was taking its toll on me. I had a 3-week temp assignment doing data entry at a .com in Boston and intentionally wore the same sweater to work every day, not because it was always cold inside the cavernous building, but because I found that on weekends, wearing anything I'd worn to work that week depressed the hell out of me. The clothes were permanently stained with a mental reminder that I was a nobody at these companies, so eventually I picked a ratty sweater to be my unofficial temping uniform. It was red with an obnoxious bright yellow stripe stitched across the chest and an ever-growing rip in the left elbow. And it dawned on me one morning that not a single employee had noticed I'd worn the garish thing every day for 3 straight weeks. At first, I figured this was just how things were at these companies. All these drones wearing the same business casual outfits to work every day, the worker bee mentality blinding them to any outward signs of individuality. But then I heard one employee shout to another, "Chase, you wore that tie last week." And the aforementioned Chase raising his arms and laughing. "Boss did," he replied, holding up the end of his plain blue tie. "You're like the 10th person to notice." To be fair, some of my coworkers at these companies viewed me positively, but ultimately it all boiled down to the same thing. I didn't matter in the slightest. Employees treated contractor plumbers and electricians with a certain measure of respect due to the fact that these men with their ass cracks showing were experts in their specific vocations, whereas I was there to carry out the lowly, simplistic tasks that full-time employees were either too lazy or appalled to do themselves. Amanda and I would occasionally go to a party on the weekend, and I realized pretty quickly how much I hated being asked, "So what do you do?" I couldn't answer that I was a writer because the follow-up question was always, of course, "Are you published?" I'd shake my head, and the look on their faces was as if I just claimed to be a doctor merely because I was familiar with Neosporin. So instead, I started replying, "Temping," in spite of knowing it would kill their initial interest in getting to know me better. It had never occurred to me back in Boulder when I'd lie in bed daydreaming about my future that being a struggling writer also meant totally relinquishing your self-esteem. I didn't put 2 and 2 together and realized that not having a full-time day job actually meant being broke. And I suddenly felt foolish for assuming the struggling writer's life was somehow going to feel romantic. One day, I overheard an employee actually refer to me as the bitch as he bantered with a coworker when they passed by my station. And it was clear by the way the coworker knowingly nodded that this was a universal, excluding me, nickname. I was suddenly filled with such a deep fury. Unfortunately, one confusing thing that happens when I get flooded with a fight or flight mechanism is that my eyes well up with what I prefer to call tears of rage. I mentally cursed at my puffy reflection in the monitor and tried fantasizing about throwing down with the guy. But even my fantasies were getting emasculated by this environment. "You wouldn't like me when I'm angry," I'd whisper, glaring at him, "because I cry." The following morning, I woke up to a freezing apartment. The heat had cut off in the middle of the night, and there was frost in all the windows. Amanda was already out in the kitchen eating cereal, and I started picking out an outfit. I pulled my cords over the gray sweatpants I'd slept in. "What are you doing?" she asked, walking into the room with a hairbrush in her hand. "It's cold out," I replied. "You'll be burning up by lunchtime." I ignored her, and she went into the bathroom. I opened the bottom drawer of the dresser, put on a white t-shirt, and looked at myself in the mirror. Maybe it was because it was the first thing in the morning, so I hadn't eaten in 12 plus hours, but I was shocked at how thin I looked. I pictured the employee who had called me a bitch, and that old feeling, one I hadn't felt in a long time, resurfaced as I stared at my curtain rod arms and the way the shirt sleeves draped so loosely over them. I mentally cursed myself out for not having committed to a Navy SEAL-inspired push-ups and pull-ups regimen all this time. I put on a button down and my neck looked fragile, as if my head were connected to my torso by a straightened paperclip. I took off the button down and put 2 extra t-shirts on before rebuttoning the shirt over it. I felt thicker, solidish. It was only after a minute or so of flexing when I even realized what I was doing. I leaned over to peek at the bathroom door. Amanda was brushing her teeth. I quickly tucked in the shirt and bloused it. I looked noticeably stronger. I turned to the side and exhaled. I felt a tightness in my chest, but it wasn't from the shirts. The bathroom door opened. "Until I build a base," I said softly, before waddling out into the kitchen. Getting emasculated at work not only forced me to wear extra layers again, but it completely stymied my writing output. I couldn't stop thinking about all the crap I endured at my temp gigs and spent my days at home not typing away at the computer and instead pacing the kitchen, reenacting moments from work, revising them so they ended up with me punching out an employee. It didn't help that I'd hit an impasse with the Great American Squirrel novel around the same time. After an initial burst of production, I realized that in order for the third act to work, one of the squirrels would somehow need to learn how to use the internet. Since it was a hyper-realistic novel, this stumbling block ultimately proved insurmountable. And before I knew it, I'd set the novel in progress aside indefinitely. Thank you.
Okay. Is this good? Hello? Hi. Okay. Thank you so much for that, David. I will introduce Jose now. It is difficult for me to quantify Jose's impact on my writing and learning here at Solstice. His kindness, generosity, and gentle encouragement is the perfect personality for students to achieve what Aristotle in his Nicomachean Ethics called eudaimonia, to flourish in a creative academic program. Jose was my mentor for my first semester. I felt confident submitting creative work on sensitive, difficult, complex subjects, knowing that I would receive the most caring and comprehensive feedback possible. Our personalities meshed, our minds met, and we formed a great match in collaboration for the semester. I'm sure many can agree, I am a better student, writer, and person for having met Jose. Beyond his positive qualities, Jose received his BA from the College of Santa Fe, his MFA from New York University, and his PhD from the University of Cincinnati. In addition to working with Solstice, Jose is an assistant professor at Suffolk University, where he teaches courses on Latinx literature, poetic forms, lyric essays, and creative criticism. Jose is a Canto Mundo Fellow and has published poetry and nonfiction. His most recent lyric memoir, Ruin and Want, has been published through Sundress Publications. Jose's style, exemplified by Ruin and Want, is raw, haunting, and poignant. Jose has the bravery to tackle sensitive subjects and transform their stark darkness into delicacy. Please offer a sincere welcome to Dr. Jose Angel Araguz.
Marissa, that was amazing. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Thank you so very, very much. I'm almost, I'm going to hold it together. I'd like to start off before I get to my reading, I would like to share a poem from a student of mine named Hanan Tufaha. Recently, because we're at a writing residency, right? So I assigned a sonnet and they turned it in on time, but they apologized because at the bottom where the couplet would be was parentheses holding ellipses. So we got parentheses, ellipses, parentheses, ellipses. And I'm like, well, that's kind of cool. And they were like, yeah, I don't have those lines yet. I'm sorry, but I did want to turn it in on time. I'm like, I think that counts as an ending though. And so the reason why, and this is what I love about what's so valuable and special about the mentor-mentee relationship is you get to kind of collaborate like this. The sonnet is called Sonnet for Palestine. Hanan is Palestinian American, and I worked with her this past semester, and they have been through. I worked with them this past semester, and yeah, they've been through a lot. And the absence of those lines, I was like, yeah, this whole thing is unresolved, right? The genocide going on. So I would like to read this poem, one, to honor the friendship and with my student Hanan, and also in solidarity with those calling for a ceasefire. This is Sonnet for Palestine. Olive branch wields unrelenting teardrops to water the soil of its foundation, fingers outstretched as a shield for its crop, the skin of ancient bark awaits cremation. This land gave birth to my bloodline before the Nakba. When it was taken, where my Jeddo picked fresh grapes off the vine and built the home his children would live in. Now, explosions ring promise of morning. White phosphorus fog clouds once blue sky. Hands that shaped life are left with a warning. Evicted from home, or destined to die? Okay, so thank you. Thank you, Hanan. So I teach poetry and I teach creative nonfiction, and I'm going to read a little bit of poetry and a little bit of nonfiction. And I wanted to take the opportunity because y'all are such a special community here. I want to put an intention in the air that I'm going to revisit the manuscript these poems are from, and at least finish the manuscript, if not send it out, because life's been kind of a lot past couple years, and I've been feeling it lately. But yeah, I'm like, wait, these poems these things that we create and that we love, like they matter. So, and we encourage each other to care for the things that matter. So I need to follow some of my own advice, right? So anyway, that's what I'm putting out there, and y'all are with me. You can also see this as like accountability partners, right? Like, hey, did you actually work on this thing, like you said? All right. So catch me next residency, all right? So I'm going to read 3 poems from that manuscript. This first one is called "The Light Over Ramsey Street." Ramsey Street is the street where where my family lives in Corpus Christi, Texas. And specifically, this manuscript deals with the fact that we moved from garage apartments until I was like 10 years old. And then we started paying on this house. And like my mom owns a house. Like that was such a big accomplishment for her. And I'll stop there. Yeah. This is called "The Light Over Ramsey Street." Scratches from a dog no longer living mark the back door of my mother's house. The door leads to a room where I and my brothers later, after I left, slept. Ramsey Street within earshot. I grew up with a fear of dogs, learned quick each one is raised bravo in Texas, made fierce by being treated fiercely. Walks home from school meant rattled chain link fences, frayed rope around necks, spurred by gnash and a reflexed growl. When I left, my brother had a dog named Champ. It's his marks marring the back door where I used to sleep and dream, a Ramsey Street without an end. Home miles ahead and blocked by a black dog staring me down, snarling as I inched to one side all night. I imagine that dog was the same one that bit my mother long before I was born. The dog's teeth left a scar below her bottom lip, each word she's spoken since then, jagged. I left her house at 17 and with my own jagged words for company, kept moving forward. Adelante, she said to me countless times on the phone. Tienes que seguir. And I have gone on. My door, another door now, when I close my eyes at night and think about the money I don't have, the money I'll earn already spoken for. Each stray debt beats inside me, slips down and beats again until the night begins to pad and leave, its dogged eyes holding every star, stars leashed as I am in cold night. The next 2 poems are part of a series in this book. It's a series of poems that I call scriptures, and they take different subjects. So I'm going to read, the first one I'll read is Scripture Meadowlark. But the thing about the other thing that keeps this sequence of poems together is that I create different metaphors about the day my father died, which is a day I don't know. Like it just 2 weeks later, we found out, hey, your dad's dead. And I'm like, oh, okay. Little kid Jose kind of like, okay, well, I'm moving on with my life. And I guess we're not going to talk about that anymore. And so, yeah. And then it occurred to me when I started writing the poems, I'm like, I can't, there's no date. And like, I don't even have a date to hold on to. So anyway, I ran with that. This is Scripture Meadowlark. Like the meadowlark who builds on land, gathers dead grasses for walls, then learns how to land at a distance and walk through burrs and high grass. Home, a place impossible to find. The day my father died keeps becoming part of everything around him. Named bird of the fields, not because it's seen there, but because there, sun-chested as if proud, speckled as if coming into shape or dissolving, it disappears. I have only seen it once, and then only knew I saw it afterwards. Older and with the words laid plainly on the page. I think of what I closely follow and what has left me at its door. This was entitled Scripture Wind. In some languages, words cross the page east to west, while some cross west to east. The wind keeps changing hands, and no one comprehends what I feel in my chest, hearing my father pressed ink on bandanas, words my mother left behind. The day my father died hastes shadows, stirs the leaves. The same air behind leaves, behind words, a hand without these words. So yeah, I need to go back and take care of those poems and show them some respect and some love, right? And I'll update you next winter residency. So now I'm going to read from my latest collection of my lyric memoir. It's called Ruin and Want. Let's see, Ian has been picking on me that because we're both poets, and he's like, wait, you trust the right hand margin? I'm like, I do. Sometimes we need it. But no, so the book is about, the central story about the book is an affair I had when I was 17 with my high school English teacher who was 30 years older than me. You can imagine this is a hard book to kind of like, I'm like, oh, I'm going to share about it now. So that's the central story, that kind of predatory relationship. And then I kind of share stories around it, focused on ideas of ruin and want, content warning, the sexual predation, assault, sexual situations. I'll be talking about my history with the eating disorder in this as well. And the two other things I want to make sure to say is at the excerpts that I picked, I mentioned two things by James Joyce, Ulysses, specifically the last chapter of Ulysses. I'm not going to ask who's read Ulysses, because if you have, I'm going to feel bad. And if you haven't, I'm going to feel bad for mentioning it. But the last chapter, and this is, just context. The last chapter is a stream of consciousness, like 50 pages or more, of a character named Molly Bloom. And you'll see where it shows up, but just remember it's stream of consciousness, and I quote from it. And then I mentioned a short story called Araby, and that's self-explanatory in here. The last thing, the last excerpt I'm going to share at the end is me kind of manipulating a poem by E.E. Cummings, the one that's like, oh, may I feel, said he. So I'll be mentioning that. You'll be like, hey, that sounds like a poem. It's because it is. It rhymes and everything. It does the thing. And I'm also making sure to read it because I had to pay for the right to use it in the book. So I'm going to get my money's worth, right? And he's going to be happy I said that. All right. So thank you. And this is a very nonlinear memoir. So just walk with me. The characters, the predatory teacher, L, and I'm J in this. And I think that's all the setup. Okay. Want to write a book about L. Want to write a book about how L manipulates me. Want to write a book about a white woman preying upon a brown boy. Want to write a book about Corpus Christi's social, racial, and economic dysfunctions as embodied in a predatory relationship. Every time I try, I find myself looking over my shoulder. Never want to write the book she wants me to. Something glorifying her, but made so vague that she would be both celebrated and, at the same time, kept secret. Elle gifts me a copy of James Joyce's Dubliners and says to read Araby, tasks me to find her favorite line. In the back of her minivan, parked on the beach, Elle takes my teenage hand and slips it under her dress, whispers, do you feel how wet I am? I do, and I don't. I do in that my body is present, and I don't in that I am unsure what I am allowed to feel. I do in that I have heard this played out in movies and stories from friends, and I don't in that I am surprised to see her eyes waiting for a response. I do in that I've been wanting this kind of scene to play out with a woman, fantasized and gotten lost in thought, thinking about it. And I don't in that I find myself not having the focus of fantasy, I can hear the ocean crashing. I can hear car doors open and close in the distance. I am worried. I sprayed on too much cool water because it is all I can smell. And I cannot stop thinking that I should have had a response to what she said on the drive here. I have great breasts, just wait. I do, in that her eyes have a vulnerability to them that I have not seen before, a drop of the control and charm, and I don't, in that I feel responsible for what has changed and yet in control of nothing. I don't, in that when years have passed, I still will be unsure what this one moment means, and I do because I must find the words for what I feel. Wanting closure and understanding, I talk about Elle to others. Guys pat me on the back, say things like, must have been sweet. That's so 90s, by the way. One guy says he didn't know hot for teacher was a real thing. Some people look deeper into my eyes, perhaps trying to see what else sees in me. No one calls it trauma. No one calls it sexual assault. No one calls it grooming. No one calls it inappropriate. The most familiar reaction from anyone is an awkward, heated silence, so much like the one the whole affair leaves me in, listening as words uselessly and recklessly spin out of me until done, until all is silence. From James Joyce's short story, Araby. Quote, I thought little of the future. I did not know whether I would ever speak to her or not, or if I spoke to her, how I could tell her of my confused adoration. But my body was like a harp, and her words and gestures were like fingers running upon the wires. Want to tell Elle right away that I read the words, have found what I feel she wanted me to find, and flushed with the good student thrill of it. But I spend the night instead, worried I am wrong as I do the dishes, take out the trash, clean up after my siblings, play my guitar during commercial breaks while watching reruns of Nick at Night, lock and relock the front door at least 8 times before going to bed. Elle gives me a copy of James Joyce's Ulysses, tasks me to read the last 50 pages, says, we are there. Only I find there is no punctuation, no cease to the voice. I end up reading only the dirty parts, which feels incriminating at first, then eventually misguided, as I cannot see myself anymore. From Ulysses, episode 18, quote, if I can only get in with a handsome young poet at my age, I'll throw them the first thing in the morning till I see if the wish card comes out, or I'll try pairing the lady herself and see if he comes out. I'll read and study all I can find, or learn a bit off by heart, if I knew who he likes, so he won't think me stupid, if he thinks all women are the same. And I can teach him the other part. I'll make him feel all over him till he half faints under me. Then he'll write about me, lover and mistress publicly too. End quote. Want to believe she wouldn't be so bold as to have me finding these words that feel as if they incriminate the both of us, that we are there, bluntly and messily and crudely said. Then I remember that the book is written by a man, that a man created Molly, and Molly's voice is some part of Joyce, some fantasy wish fulfillment mixed with reality probably, but all within what a man claims to understand of a woman, which can never be anything but an approximation, a guess and gesture informed by societal narratives of gender roles. Joyce created Molly, shaped a person to be what he needed them to be, in words that I look over, wondering what is being asked of me. Want to share that I see it now as a kind of grooming, what Joyce did in creating Molly, what he says through her, what her character says about what men think women are like, and what men think women want. Also, what Joyce says through her about how men think women want, that they are all body, all, quote, acquiescence, self-abandon, relaxation, the end of all resistance, end quote. While the men in the story are all mind, directive, control. What Molly wants from her young poet, how she settles for her husband, what the patriarchy has done to all involved, generations of readers included, the way the book is canon, a classic, all a grooming into place of human experience as heteronormative. I notice that each if in Molly's speech is speculation driven by want, and I realize I have my own list of ifs. If it hadn't been for my hormones, if I had only walked away, if I had only transferred classes, if I had had any self-restraint and awareness, if Elle had had any, maybe then it wouldn't have happened. Maybe then it wouldn't feel like it was all my fault. Wanting to do it right, I spend $700 I do not have the first time I go to a strip club. The last dancer in the VIP lounge sits on my lap, asks me what I do for a living. My friends from college coach me to say that we are young professionals, asks me to dress the part, button-ups and slacks, to say I am a broker, a financial advisor. I even look up what an actuary does, how they are experts in uncertainty and use mathematics, statistics, and financial theory to measure, manage, and mitigate financial risk. I memorize all this, but still say poet. We sit silent. I read the names tattooed on her thigh, names on a ribbon, names across a heart. I feel like I am failing my friends. I feel like I am failing Elle. My tia and I are heading over to her friend Jay and Chris's. Jay and Chris have an apartment in a nicer part of town, and going there means I'll get to hang out with Jay and be called tough guy, which I like. In my eyes, Jay and Chris are so glamorous, they could have had their own 80s style sitcom. Chris, the charming Delta Burke style lead, and Jay, the laid back dude, quick with the jokes. My tia and I could be their neighbors. Jay and I could hang out, and he could teach me to live up to tough guy status. Jay always has his sunglasses on, aviators with a dark tint, giving way to a clear view of his cheekbones. That and his short sleeve button-ups and hair in a pompadour style cut. I think it's everything that is cool. Cool, too, how he talks to me like a WWF wrestler psyching out the competition by hyping himself up. Perhaps I think sitcom because of how much my tia laughs with them. The only other time she laughs like this is when I put on my mother's gym clothes and march around the house. I am never afraid of her hurting me or making fun of me when we are at Jay and Chris's. She is another person completely, which means I can be too. Later, I can't remember when we stopped going over nor why. I also can't remember the moment when it clicked that Jay and Chris were both biologically women. I only know my tia laughed a little less on the weekends. I only know Jay was the kind of man I wanted to be. I meet Jojo over at Jay and Chris's. Jojo is Jay's nephew and is spending the summer with them. He's about my age, which is why I'm invited to sleep over one weekend. Of hanging out, I only remember feeling tense, already afraid of other boys, of being bullied, made fun of. Jojo is taller and skinnier than me, which I both fear and envy. We probably watch HBO, which is a big deal because we don't have it at home. What I remember clearly is the tension of sitting at the table during meals. Jay and Chris looking sternly at Jojo, asking him to eat. Jojo staring down at his plate, not moving. The food there changing meal to meal like words he can't get himself to speak. Jojo retching in the bathroom at night. On the last morning, Jojo eats a few small bites of potato and eggs. Jay tips down his sunglasses, the only time I can remember him doing so, his eyes smaller than I expect, and says thank you so softly to Jojo, I almost miss it. Want always to be seen as the Greek statue one girlfriend compares me to in college, when I would run 5 miles each morning, then eat an apple for breakfast, and nothing else till dinner. Want the friend who gasps, then grabs at my t-shirt, who in her fist pulls the fabric tighter on my torso so that enough of it is in her hand the shirt feels like light on my skin, who then loosens it, letting the fabric hang off me as it would on a clothesline, who whispers, Jesus, Jay, where did you go? Want her to always be asking this, for someone to always be asking this, so I feel the apple turn in the empty space I am and feel proud. Want the friend who says I need to cut it out as we are in the gym lifting weights after a run, who tells me how others are beginning to talk. Want him to say it, what he means, to quote what others are saying about me, but he only says, cut it out, and don't act like you don't know you have a problem. Because I know that he will never say it, that I will be left alone to hurt myself because we are both men, and men don't do what I am doing. So there is nothing to talk about, nothing beyond a gnashed core where there was apple, and now only remains hurt flesh rotting to the color of my skin. Starving myself, all I care about is, would Elle like my body now? Would I be wanted now? Wanting I don't know what, I take two different women to see Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, the movie where a man and a woman pay to have each other erased from each other's memories. I wonder what Elle would think of this movie, then ask each woman at the end of the night what line they think is my favorite. One says, I don't know. I liked it when she said too many guys think she's a concept and she completes them. And then she says she's just a fucked up girl. Later, I realize I'm not looking to hear myself figured out. I am looking for who they think I am, because I don't trust myself to know. Want to remember how this E.E. Cummings poem came into my life, but can only imagine Elle reading it aloud. May I feel, said he. I'll squeal, said she. Just once, said he. It's fun, said she. Not sure why she shared it. All I can hear now is how the gender roles were reversed for us. May I touch, said she. How much, said he. A lot, said she. Why not, said he. Enough repetition and the roles blur. Reading on, I feel my eyes water, feel my skin itch. Let's go, said we. Not too far, said we. What's too far, said we. Where you are, said we. And like that, I am a teen in the classroom again, painfully aware of how other students shift in their seats when I pass. May I stay, said he. Which way, said she. Like this, said he. If you kiss, said she. I never knew what other students knew about what went on between us, nor how much, if at all. May I move, said he. Is it love, said he. If you're willing, said he. But you're killing, said he. Nor why exactly I can envision her leaning with one hand on my desk. But it's life, said we. But your wife, said we. Now, said we. How, said we. Her face away from mine, I cannot see what the class might have seen. Tip top, said we. Don't stop, said we. Oh no, said he. Go slow, said she. Only feel the hum of her voice down my arm again, her hand an inch from mine. Come, said he. Said she. You're divine, said he. You are mine, said she. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jose, Araguz, David, can we have another round of applause?